Tonight's notes are titled Jamestown, the First English Colony. Sort of. Because though we consider Jamestown to be the first English colony in the New World, it really wasn't. The English had attempted to create a colony in what is now North Carolina, what we refer to as the Roanoke colony, a few years before. And that colony mysteriously vanished. So Jamestown wasn't the first attempt, but it was the first permanent English settlement in the New World. So for that, we consider it to kind of be the first colony. Jamestown was established in 1607, an important date to kind of remember. 1607, Jamestown. And it started when the English king, King James I, gave a group called the Virginia Company the right to recruit settlers and set up a colony in this land called Virginia. The company belonged to investors who owned stock. So these would be people and businesses in England who bought stock in the Virginia Company in exchange for hopefully making some money. Now, right from the start, there were some unexpected problems. And Jamestown just didn't really get off on the right foot. For one, the trip took a lot longer than expected. And so they used up a lot of their supplies before they ever even got off the ship. They had no way of knowing that the time they were planning to start this colony was right in the middle of a terrible drought. The area of Virginia where they settled was in one of its worst droughts in centuries. They also unknowingly picked a pretty bad location. Part of the reason for that was because they wanted a spot that was away from the shore and kind of upriver enough that they could hide from Spanish ships that were sailing along the coast. So they went up the James River and kind of around a bend in the river. And the spot that they picked happened to be pretty much in a swamp. There were lots of mosquitoes. There really wasn't a lot of fresh water. The water where they were in was what's called brackish. It's kind of a mix of fresh water and salt water, but you can't drink it. And there was the issue of disease. As we have discussed, disease went both ways. Europeans gave it to natives, natives gave it to Europeans, and so a lot of colonists died from disease. In fact, only about 40 out of 104 survived the first year at Jamestown. So right from the start, the settlers in Jamestown are having some difficulty. There were also some problems with the settlers themselves. You have to remember that this colony was started to make money. So what you got were a lot of men, no women in the first groups, men who were more interested in finding gold than in building shelter, growing food. The problem was there wasn't any gold. Now, there's some strands of gold and other resources in Virginia, just not where they were. So they were hoping to find it, kind of laying out, and it's just not there. So they're wasting their time looking for gold that doesn't exist, rather than building shelter, growing crops, finding food to feed themselves. They didn't have the skills that they needed to be successful in the wilderness. This was a completely untamed land. And the settlers coming over simply did not have the tools, the equipment, the skills to deal with life in the wilderness. A few of them, probably most prominently Captain John Smith, but I would say probably even John Smith and some of the more prepared weren't really ready for what they were going to face. On top of that, some of the men didn't really want to work. You had a group of what were considered gentlemen who were kind of in charge of the settlement. They really weren't used to working, and a lot of them were really bad leaders. And then you had indentured servants. And these indentured servants, they would agree to work for someone for a period of time, usually around 7 years, in exchange for someone paying for them to come over. And so you don't have much incentive to work hard, right? If you work really hard, it's not like you're going to get paid more. So a lot of the servants really didn't care that much about working hard either. On top of that, you had issues with the natives, and the settlers had some real problems getting along with the local Native Americans. The local Indians were incredibly well organized. The settlers landed right in the heart of the Powhatan Kingdom, and this was a strong, well-organized group of Native Americans. And they weren't real wild about this group of strangely dressed settlers coming in and building a fort on their land. There was some agreement, there was some positive relationships with the English settlers, some trading between the two groups, but really within 2 years or so, the English and the Native Americans are frequently battling with each other, and they're at war. Native Americans would stage raids on English settlements and launch sneak attacks on the English. And the colonists would retaliate. They would launch their own surprise raids, and they would do things like there's evidence of passing along wine, which seemed like a peace offering or a gift, but poisoning the wine. So there was some pretty bad blood between the natives and the Jamestown settlers. So what were some of the outcomes of the early years at Jamestown? Well, for one, a lot of colonists died. In fact, in the first 6 months, about half of the colonists who came over died. In the second year, a fire ripped through the fort, which destroyed a lot of the buildings, destroyed a lot of the supplies. Things were so bad by the winter of 1609 to 1610 that it got the nickname the Starving Time. And at the end of that winter, and when spring started in 1610, there were only about 60 colonists left. This is out of nearly 900 who had come over in those first couple of years. Only 60 were still alive. What eventually helps the colony to survive is a money-making crop called tobacco. Now, tobacco was very valuable. It was in high demand in Europe, but as we'll learn, it required a lot of land to grow. So on the one hand, it helped Jamestown to survive. But on the other hand, it also led to more conflicts with the natives because Jamestown then needed to spread out into new settlements so they could have more land to grow tobacco. So your response question is this. If you could go back in time and offer advice, offer suggestions to help these early settlers at Jamestown, what suggestion would you give them that might help them to be more successful? And I don't want you to just write something down. I want you to be specific. So think about what do you think would be the most helpful suggestion you could give them? And then in your response box, elaborate. Why would that help them to be more successful? Your response should be at least 3 to 4 sentences in length. Save your work after you finish your response question and print off your notes before our next class.